Good day, everyone, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. My name is Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellowship Program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together former federal scientists to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. The webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will soon be added to the QEM network and granted access to the Resource Hub. And I'm very proud to introduce our Heroes Fellows today. Dr. Sharmini Boghos holds a PhD in Environmental Earth System Science and Archaeology from Stanford University. Her experiences in STEM workforce development with minority-serving institutions include 8 years at Florida A&M University as the Assistant Director of the NOAA Center for Coastal and Marine Ecosystems and Interim Director of the Florida Georgia Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. With expertise in science-informed program strategy, science diplomacy, federal grant management, and community engagement, she's committed to building inclusive ecosystems where science serves society through trust, transparency, and transformative partnerships. And Dr. Jennifer Riehl is an environmental scientist and policy professional with experience in multidisciplinary collaboration, federal grants management through NSF, USDA, and developing collaborative environmental science and land management policy strategies. She has expertise in forestry and community genetics, wildfire science, data science, environmental policy, and public outreach. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to our fellows today.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you all for joining us today. We just have a few housekeeping notes, as we will include in the chat. If you need closed captioning, you can turn captions on under the More button in your Zoom menu by clicking the option Show Captions. As Christine mentioned, the slides of this presentation and the recording will be available on the QEM Resource Hub. And as an update, all recordings will also be available on the QEM Heroes new YouTube page, which is linked on the next slide. Jennifer and I would also like to share a disclaimer that all views expressed in this presentation are our own personal views only. We do not represent NSF, the federal government, QEM, or anyone else. The views expressed do not constitute official advice or guidance and are based on our own experiences and research. Today, we're continuing our exploration of the National Science Foundation's Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide with a focus on navigating proposal preparation. There have been some unexpected changes related to the PAPPG, as an audience member mentioned in the last webinar. So we'll also go over some of those effects, what may come into effect in fiscal year 27, and suggestions for how to prepare for those changes as well. The good news is, if you attended our previous webinar on the PAPPG supplements, you're already aware of many of the changes that can be expected in the new guidance, but we'll also highlight any additional changes to bring everyone up to speed here. We hope you'll also be able to join us for our next webinar in September, when we'll focus on award management, and we'll then continue our coverage of the PAPPG and any related updates in October. We'll have the September registration link available at the end of this presentation, and next month you can check out the QEM events page for finalized registration link for October. Okay, so today we anticipate that after this webinar, you will know the basic process of preparing proposals for NSF funding opportunities and be able to find and navigate the resources available to you. We also provide an overview of how the draft guidance on financial assistance, or GFA, compares to the current PAPPG 24-1, including identification of specific changes to be aware of that may impact proposal submission sometime in the next fiscal year.
So in this first part of the webinar, we're going to briefly go through what information is contained in chapters 2 through 5 of the current guide, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or PAPPG 24-1. This slide outlines the current structure of the PAPPG. Part 1 of the PAPPG has 5 chapters that cover the proposal submission process from the pre-submission stage all the way to a proposal assessment. And in our first webinar in March, we covered Chapter 1 as well as how to find funding opportunities. And there's a recording of this presentation linked on this slide. We're also going to cover Part 2 of the PAPPG in September and October, providing an overview of the post-award management procedures and policies. And you can go to the QEM events page linked here for more details and links to register. So in this webinar, we're going to be covering chapters 2 through 5, which includes proposal preparation instructions, proposal review, and post-award decisions. So originally, we had planned to use this webinar as a time to demonstrate how to navigate and use the online resources for proposal preparation. However, there's currently a new draft guide that the National Science Foundation submitted to the Federal Register for public comment. So we felt that you all would benefit from a session that also compares the current proposal preparation and review procedures and policies to the new draft version. We're still going to provide some basic information and advice on proposal preparation that complements previous webinars on this general topic that have been done by us as well as our fellow heroes. So 2 final notes I just want to make about the current PAPPG. First, there's a subject index that can be helpful when you're looking for a specific topic or have a specific question in mind. And I anticipate that the updated version coming this fall or later will also have a way to navigate the guides by subject index. Second, at the end of each chapter, there are often very useful exhibits that are either lists or diagrams of specific information. For example, at the end of chapter 2, which we're going to cover next, there's 3 exhibits. There's one for the proposal checklist, which we're going to go over on the next slide. And then there's another one that lists potentially disqualifying conflicts of interest. And then there's a 3rd exhibit that gives definitions for categories of personnel. And those exhibits can help answer various questions quickly. So our first webinar covered the basics of searching for funding opportunities and assessing fit and eligibility prior to proposal preparation and submission. And in this webinar, we're going to pick up from that pre-submission stage to cover the next step, which is writing the proposal. As I mentioned before, there are helpful exhibits listed at the end of each chapter of the PAPPG, and one of the ones at the end of chapter 2 is a checklist that you can use to make sure you're accounting for proposal preparation guidelines outlined in that chapter. You may also need to check solicitation-specific requirements, but the checklist also puts something in there reminding you to do that. So this checklist is meant to help proposers avoid having the proposals returned without review due to a failure to follow any required guidelines. So we've outlined the major areas covered by the checklist on the right within the red box. The first section covers basics, like checking whether your proposal fits the program and that you're eligible to submit a proposal. The next area is covering logistical questions, such as whether you've notified the agency if you need accommodations for accessibility reasons when submitting a proposal. Then the checklist delves into the main part of preparing a proposal, which is writing the project description and getting the relevant supplementary documents in order. So the cover sheet is where you specify the program being applied to, who's applying to it, and what type of proposal is being submitted. And usually proposers are submitting full proposals for a standard grant. There are other proposal types, though, that can be relatively common, such as rapid, planning, conference, or supplemental proposals. That's just a few that I've named. There is more information about proposal types that we discussed in our March webinar, covering the pre-submission of proposals information. And you can also go to Chapter 2, Section F of the current PAPPG to look at that information as well. So the project summary is a 1-page document the proposers use to summarize the main idea behind their proposal, as well as an overview of the intellectual merit and broader impacts of the proposed project idea. And then after that, you have the project description, and that's where you describe in detail the project idea, what you're planning to do, how you're planning to do it, why you want to do it, how you plan to evaluate success, what benefits to society may result from a successful project. It's basically where you're making a strong and thorough case for the intellectual merit and broader impacts of your project idea. And then you have the project description is supplemented or supported, excuse me, by supplementary documents, and that includes references that you cite to back up your claims, a budget and a justification of that budget, relevant resources the investigator will have access to, details about the people who will work on the project, and what their relevant expertise is, how data resulting from the project will be managed, and how students and postdocs will be mentored through the life of the project. And there's other supplementary documents that may be relevant depending on the specific solicitation requirements, any collaborative efforts you might be doing in a project, or cost sharing requirements. So many of you may be familiar with this checklist or preparing proposal submissions to NSF or another agency, and we'd be really interested to hear from you about what part of the proposal preparation process you find to be the most challenging. So if you can scan the QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code listed underneath the QR code, you can access the poll, and as you send your responses in, they'll appear on the screen. Looks like we've got some responses starting to come in now. We set this up as a word cloud too, so the size of the words will indicate how many people, like the larger the size, the more people they found that particular thing challenging. The smaller, the less number of people. Everything. I love that. But a lot of interesting things. Selling your expertise, writing the project description, the budget, broader impacts. I'd be interested to hear more about diversity, what people are thinking about when they say that. So if anybody is willing to either write a comment in the chat or put your hand up to be highlighted to speak, that would be great. Okay, it looks like somebody said broader impact in the chat, so I'm guessing the diversity piece is relating to broader impacts then. Okay. And give everybody like another 30 seconds or so. All right. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on this. And it looks like some of the biggest things that people struggle with are writing the budget and knowing how to write the broader impact. So those are definitely things that I think our group can move forward with trying to provide some more resources for. So I really appreciate that input. right. So, to that end, it can be really helpful to understand the overall structure of proposal preparation requirements, but it's also helpful to have some more detailed information on how to effectively execute different requirements. So, for now, we have collated resources related to previous webinars that QEM Heroes have given this year and that are relevant to different steps in the proposal preparation process. So you can find the direct links to the presentation and the slides on this slide, and it'll take you to the QEM Resources Hub where those are located. And then you can also go to our new YouTube page to view all the Heroes' previous webinars. And upcoming webinars will be added to both those resources as they happen. So in reference to people talking about budgets, there's actually a presentation that was done on proposal budgets. So that might be something worth checking out. And then I know there's a couple in here too talking about broader impacts under the merit review process. So those are worth checking out. I also wanted to let everyone know that there's an upcoming workshop on developing supplementary documents that's being run by our fellow heroes, Carrie Hall and Chris Atchison, on August 19th. You don't need to have attended the first part to be able to participate in the second part as well. So if you're interested in that, please check out that link and sign up for it.
Jennifer, I believe Tarina has her hand raised, would like to add
Oh, I
something.
missed that. I'm sorry, Tarina. Go
That's
ahead.
okay. That's okay. I just wanted to put in a shameless plug. The QM Resource Hub will be uh, publicizing a new page in the hub called Budget Resources at the end of August. It will include some tips and tricks to budgeting, as well as 3 calculators that will help you process through building your budget. So look for that towards the end of August in the QM Resource Hub.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Tarina.
Mhm.
All right. So once the proposer has put their proposal documents together, it's time to submit the proposal. And at NSF, there's 2 portals that you can submit proposals to. Grants.gov or research.gov. Overall, the main benefits of using research.gov include the fact that it has a built-in compliance checker, which you can use to kind of do a preliminary check that your proposal is meeting some of those basic requirements that they're going to check before they go through, and that will help you avoid getting something returned without review because of a guideline that wasn't followed. The other thing is that you can follow a proposal through its entire life cycle in one place at research.gov. So the main benefits of using grants.gov are that it's a centralized portal to look for and apply to available funding opportunities across the federal government. And I think currently there's 900 different grant programs across 26 federal grant-making agencies that you can look up on grants.gov. And that portal also has a dedicated customer service feature that you can use if you're having trouble with it. So depending on your situation, you may prefer one portal over the other. For example, if you're mostly submitting proposals to NSF, then you might want to use research.gov. It might be the best option. It's got that built-in compliance checker, which will reduce the chances of a return without review based on non-compliance. And then you can also follow the life of your proposals or awards, or both really, in that portal. And if you submit proposals to multiple federal agencies, then maybe grants.gov might be a better option since it's a central portal for all federal grant-making agencies. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharmini now, and she's going to talk about chapters 3 through 5 of the current PAPPG.
Thanks, Jennifer. So to recap the structure, there are a few sections of the PAPPG related to proposal preparation, including pre-submission preparation. Here we have the proposal submission and award process timeline diagram from the PAPPG, including the expected timeline for proposal submission and review. We saw in the Menti responses that timeline came up a couple of times. So this is what we would expect the timeline to be. I know there's been some delays in this process recently, but this is the aim. And so for part 1, that includes chapters 1 and 2 of the PAPPG. Chapter 1 focuses on proposal pre-submission And Chapter 2 provides proposal preparation instructions, which Jennifer just went over briefly. And these sections correspond to the portion of the timeline highlighted in the blue box here. The link for our first webinar held in March is on the right and covers pre-submission information from this chapter, Chapter 1. In May, we reviewed Chapter 3, NSF Proposal Processing and Review, which focuses on the merit review process. That process in the diagram is highlighted by this red box. And the link for the merit review webinar is here on the right hand of the slide. The information from the merit review process can also be useful in informing your proposal preparation process. Being familiar with the merit review process can help you anticipate potential weaknesses and strengths when assessing your own proposal before submission. The remaining chapters in Part 1 of the PAPPG are chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4 covers questions you may have about non-award decisions, such as withdrawals, declinations, return without review, and resubmission. So, for example, if you submitted the same proposal to 2 different agencies and it was accepted to one, you may need to withdraw your second proposal. In that instance, you would go to this section to find out how to go about the process of withdrawing an open proposal submission. If you have questions about how proposals are declined or how to resubmit a declined proposal, that's also covered in Chapter 4. Chapter 5 includes information on proposal renewal processes. So this gives you an overview of the types of information available related to proposal submission and processing in the current PAPPG. However, as we mentioned, NSF released a draft of a new guide that would potentially replace the current PAPPG 24-1. We've mentioned in the past that edits to the PAPPG typically occur each year, so this would be a continuation of that process, but with a few significant changes. Oh, you're on mute, Jennifer. Sorry.
My bad. Apologies. Thank you for pointing that out. So like Sharmini just mentioned, publishing updated versions of the proposal and award guide is usually an annual event. However, the current guide hasn't been updated since 2024. So for this reason, there were some supplemental updates that got published in late 2025 and early 2026, which we went over in a previous webinar. This new draft version is meant to integrate those updates as well as other long-standing updates that NSF had intended to make. So in this next section, we're going to go over some of the major organizational changes in the draft guide for federal assistance, as well as guide-specific changes as they correspond to the current PAPPG. So the major changes are related to the organization of the guide as a whole. So the changes are meant to create a guide that's more user-friendly, and they're doing that through using plain language titles for each guide, clearly labeling the purpose of each guide and who should use it and how they should use it, breaking policies and procedures out from one another so that users can clearly understand what they need to do for a given policy. And then bring up front previously difficult to find exhibits like the proposal checklist and the proposal submission and award process timeline diagram that we covered earlier. So additionally, the changes released in the supplements from December 2025 and January 2026 are included. And then finally, some of the changes are related to the recent OMB rule that proposes some pretty major changes to how grant making is done by federal agencies. Most of those changes apply to post-award management more so. So we'll be discussing those changes in our upcoming September and October webinars, covering the award management sections of the PAPPG / the new draft GFA. So we're going to cover the major changes that are relevant to you all for the guides that correspond to Part 1 of the PAPPG. This is pretty dense information. So if anyone has a question about something as we're covering it, please feel free to submit the question to the Q&A and we'll address it in real time. So the draft NSF guidance on financial assistance, or GFA, if it's finalized, is going to replace the previous proposal and award policies and procedures guide, or the PAPG. One of the major changes will be the organization of the proposal preparation guide. What are known as chapters in the current PAPG are reordered into distinct guides, and this rearrangement is something that NSF has been working on for a while in response to a working group that was dedicated to improving this guide for users. This new organization is meant to provide a way to more easily find the information you're looking for while you're preparing proposals or managing awards. So the introduction in Chapter 1, which includes the pre-submission info of the current PAPG, correspond to Guides 1 and 2, which cover an introduction to the agency and relevant definitions, and then pre-submission guidelines, respectively. Then Chapter 2, which is all about proposal preparation instructions, is now broken into 5 distinct guides, each covering a specific area of proposal preparation. So for example, Guide 3 would cover the guidance on writing your project description, while Guides 4 and 5 cover the preparation of supplemental documents. Then you have Guides 6 and 7, which cover special preparation instructions, including those for other proposal types like rapids, eagers, or conference proposals. Then you have Chapter 3, which covers the proposal review process, and that corresponds to Guide 8, which is still the proposal processing and merit review. Then you've got Chapter 4, which covers award declinations and corresponds to Guide 9 in the draft GFA. And then finally, you've got Chapter 5, which covers award renewal process, and that corresponds to Guide 8. Oh, I'm sorry, Guide 17. I misspoke there. So that's kind of the overall structure of the new guide. And in addition to that larger structure, there's an internal structure within each guide that has been revamped pretty extensively. So the current guide is organized by main topics at the part and chapter level. So within each chapter, relevant subtopics are organized into subsections, and all the relevant information on that subtopic is integrated within the subsection using a table of contents style breakdown as displayed in this screenshot of the current PAPG. This is looking at Chapter 2's table of contents. The draft guide, however, is going to have main topics organized into individual guides, and then each guide is going to have a streamlined structure that begins with the purpose of the guide, who should use it for what purpose, the relevant policies, or the rationale for the instructions, followed by the relevant procedures, which are basically the instructions for users to follow. And finally, it'll list the main governing authorities for those policies and procedures, such as any laws or existing codes of federal regulation that apply. So you can see this structure in the screenshot of the guide for financial assistance on the top right corner of the slide. And as an example, Guide 3 specifies that PI should use the guide to understand how to prepare their proposals, while authorized organization representatives and sponsored project offices should use that guide to ensure that proposals are meeting formatting, content, and other administrative requirements. That can help users to know what parts of the guide they need to pay particular attention to and what parts they may not need to read as thoroughly. So in addition to the major organizational changes, policy-specific changes have also been made. As we mentioned before, if you attended our webinar in April, you may recognize several of these changes are from the recent PAPG supplements. And in fact, many of the changes listed in the guides that correspond to Part 1 of the PAPG are the integration of the supplements released earlier this year. So as an example, the 2nd, 4th, and 5th changes listed under Guide 2 on this slide are directly from Supplement 1. A couple of notes I want to make to you all on the way we formatted these slides. First, we've highlighted in green and sometimes bolded text that provides the main focus of a particular change. And then we've outlined some key takeaways in the light bulb box in the top right corner for each slide, covering changes made within the draft GFA. So for the changes in Guides 1 and 2, Guides 1 and 2, just to recap, cover the pre-submission information. most of which we covered in our March webinar. And they correspond to the introduction in Chapter 1 of the current PAPPG. So Guide 1 focuses on introducing the agency, what its mission is, as well as any relevant definitions. And there are two notable changes to this guide. They've changed the information about the NSF structure to reflect the recent and still in progress restructuring of NSF directorates. And then second, the proposed OMB rule plans to get rid of fixed-priced awards. So they're preemptively removing references to that type of award in this draft guide. This change would include fixed-price subawards that an institution receiving a grant might make to a collaborating entity. And then for Guide 2, the main changes regard the types of funding opportunities that NSF will publish. So instead of having program descriptions, solicitations, and program announcements, there will only be two categories of solicitations, broad and targeted. This change is aimed at simplifying the types of funding opportunities and reflect better what they're focused on. So broad solicitations encompass what were program announcements and descriptions, and those will largely follow guidance from the current guide, whether that's the PAPPG or this new GFA at the time. And then targeted solicitations are more like representative of its existing solicitations, where they follow the guide, but then they have some additional requirements that you'll have to meet. So dear colleague letters, I haven't mentioned yet. Those are still going to be an option for publishing notices to the research community that either respond to specific issues, call for information from the community, or call for specific proposal types. They've also added a definition under Guide 2 for senior key personnel called faculty associates. It seems to provide one term for postdocs, research associates, and other faculty positions that may serve on a particular project as senior or key personnel. And the point is mainly to make sure that all senior key personnel listed are adhering to the new research security requirements. And then the rest of the changes noted for this guide are carried over from the supplements, as I mentioned before. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sharmini, and she's going to go over the changes in the draft guide for guides 3 through 9 and 17.
Thanks, Jennifer. Next, we have guides 3 through 5, which relate to proposal preparation. Guide 3 adds a requirement for former NSF staff and IPAs who no longer work at the agency to disclose if they have worked on a proposal to align with the drafted OMB rule change. There's also a reference to the use of drones in research guide in Guide 4, and Guide 5 is where you will find information regarding facilities, equipment, personnel, data management, and supporting documents for proposal preparation. The changes in Guides 4 and 5 were incorporated from the last PAPPG supplements, and we covered the supplements in our April webinar. In Guide 6, there are discipline-specific changes, particularly for biological research with potential for dual use that you may want to check based on your area of research. And we have some information about that here. And Guide 7 consolidates information for other proposal types. So now you can, within the draft, you can find that information in one place. It also includes the updated thresholds for funding based on proposal type. And these are the same thresholds that were included in the recent supplements. Guide 8 of the GFA aligns with Chapter 3 of the current PAPPG on merit review. As we mentioned before, we covered the merit review process in more detail during the May webinar, and we have a link to that here as well. We also reviewed the latest National Science Board report last month, Merit Review for a Changing Landscape. The recommendations from that report are not currently included, but could be included in a subsequent draft of the GFA. That's still in discussion. But that report is available to the public and currently sits with the Congressional House Science Committee, and there's still potential those suggested changes could come up in the future. But for now, it seems that the merit review process will remain the same, and we can operate with that assumption when submitting proposals to NSF. We should keep in mind, though, that the proposed OMB rule could have a significant impact, and specifically on the ultimate decision-making and determining which proposals are funded or receive continued funding. So continue to watch this space, and we'll continue to provide updates in our webinars as they arise. In Guide 9, there's information included regarding withdrawals, declinations, and appeals. The changes to this section remove the rationale to return a proposal without review based solely on research security concerns. It also mentions the trust framework, which was piloted in fiscal year 25 to address national security considerations that were congressionally mandated as part of the Chips and Science Act of 2022. In response to the Chips and Science Act, NSF commissioned a JSON Safeguarding and the Research Enterprise report, and I've linked the report here. I participated in this pilot, and it focused on quantum-related research only, with a potential rollout to areas throughout the agency. This reference in Guide 9 of the proposed GFA suggests that this pilot framework could be used to mitigate research security concerns in addition to the existing independent merit review process, so that mitigating steps can be taken to address these concerns rather than automatically resulting in a return without review. We just saw this morning that there was also a recent DCL published by NSF in July. This DCL indicates that there may be further restrictions prohibiting collaboration with specific international entities. This policy is not currently in place, but if the OMB rule is enacted, these policies may be enforced. I've included a link to that DCL on this slide. And if you're engaged in international collaboration or have other senior key personnel on your award that are engaged in international collaboration, I would recommend reviewing this information to see what restrictions may be put into place for senior key personnel on future awards. But as we say in the key takeaways, this would only be enacted if the OMB rule is also enacted. If you have questions about this, I have some familiarity with the trust pilot process, and I'd be happy to discuss research security requirements more during office hours. In addition to the changes from Guides 1 through 9 for proposal preparation, we also wanted to bring your attention to Guide 17 regarding award renewals and supplemental funding support. This section would remove accomplishment-based renewals. All renewals require speaking to a program officer to determine if your award is eligible for renewal. If the GFA is finalized, the only method of renewal would then be the traditional method, which requires development of a full project description rather than a brief summary of the proposed work. So that would be 15 pages versus 4. If you're interested in the renewal process, I would suggest taking a closer look at this section. Renewal can be a complicated process and does require that you notify your program officer of your intentions to apply for renewal prior to submission. I'll now turn it back over to Jennifer to summarize some of the main points we covered today on potential changes to proposal preparation according to the draft GFA.
Thanks, Sharmini. We acknowledge that this is a lot of information, so we wanted to point out a few overarching points. First, while there are significant changes in the new draft guide, proposal preparation and the merit review process remain largely the same. The biggest changes involve the organization of the information into individual guides that's meant to be more user-friendly. Additionally, this means that resources available on this topic in the QEM Heroes National Webinar Series are still going to remain relevant for the time being. We also want to note that the release and effective dates for the new guide are not set. Likely it will not be effective until sometime during the fiscal year 2027 or later, which begins on October 1st, 2026. Usually the effective dates for a new guide from NSF is 30 to 90 days after the release date of the new guide, because they want to make sure they're providing time for proposers to adjust their proposals to meet the new requirements. The proposed OMB rule will most significantly impact post-award guidelines for NSF. The biggest concern for pre-award impacts is how the results of the merit review process are used or not by politically appointed administrators to ultimately award funds. But there's many, many unknowns surrounding the implementation of this pending OMB rule. The proposed OMB rule is planned to be effective on October 1st, 2026. However, it's widely unpopular. Most of the comments were against all of it, or at least parts of it. And also, the Senate has just passed a short-term spending bill that would prevent the proposed rule from going into effect before the continuing resolution ends on December 11th, 2026. However, that still needs to be passed by the House before it would be applicable. Additionally, it's likely that there will be lawsuits filed in the coming months, giving many of the proposed changes contradicting congressional statutes, among other legal conundrums. So even if it does go into effect, it's probably going to be legally challenged at some point, multiple times. The American Council on Education has a publicly available summary of the regulation. So if you want to explore some of the details on like what the 400-page document that the OMB rule is in a much shorter format, that's a good place to go. We've linked to that on this slide. And then also we've linked some major comments that were made on the rule, publicly available comments from some major organizations that support research and education. So despite the tumultuous times, just keep in mind NSF is still funding research, and you can and should still apply to open programs. The merit review process is still being used for proposal assessment in that process as well at NSF. And then also, you can submit a comment on this draft GFA anytime between now and August 24th, 2026. So if you've got thoughts on things that you like or don't like about how they've changed it, please go and make your comments known. And then before we jump into any remaining questions that you might have, I want to go through some basic closing items. We're going to continue to provide a summary of where and how to find relevant information in the PAPPG specific to Part 2, which covers award management, as well as how the draft to GFA compares to that section. The awards management part of the PAPPG will be discussed in two parts, one in September and one in October, and you can register for the first part at the link below or contact information on this slide. And then I also just wanted to say again that we are here as a free resource for you all, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you've got questions. For example, if you have questions about how these changes may impact your research goals, we're happy to talk with you about it. You can reach us through the email addresses listed on this slide. You can also access important QEM-related resources using the QR codes on this page, including future webinars and information on all of the QEM research heroes. And lastly, we'd love to have your feedback on this webinar, what was helpful, what we could improve, or other things you'd like to see us dive more deeply into, like a specific topic or funding opportunity that you want to see featured in future webinars. You can use the feedback form to let us know about that. And we just wanted to thank everyone for spending this time with us today. And we've got about 15 minutes for general questions now.
Thank you, Drs. Riehl and Boghos. This was a wonderful presentation. We are open for questions. We have a perfect 15 minutes, so you can use the chat, you can use the Q&A tool, or you can raise your hand to come off mute with any questions you may have for our presenters. Okay, we have Rajab Atai with a hand raised. You are free to speak.
Yes, how are you? Thank you for your presentation. It is nice information and good for us. I'm new in this field, but I have maybe a general question. I submit just the first proposal last year, but I don't know. I expected maybe the response, like you said, maybe response by June. But until now, I see pending. Is that normal to waiting until, I mean, August, or I sent it by October last year? So do you have idea which time like should be response for us, or just we have to wait?
I think usually the timeline is 6 months per that timeline that Sharmini showed. But I know since last year there have been some significant delays in funding decisions being made, and some of that is because of the agency not having the money that was appropriated to it given to it until much later. So then they can't fund anything. They may have already done the panels, made decisions, but then they're just waiting to actually get their funds. So I know that's caused some of the slowdowns. Um, and then also their staff got cut by like 20 or 30%, I believe. And that's also put a lot more workload on the people who are still there. And I'm sure that's also impacting things. I was just going to say as like a last thing, and then if Sharmini, you've got anything to add to that, that I think it's perfectly fine if you want to check in with the program officer or if it's like a program specific email address on what the status of something is, especially if you've been waiting that long. You can definitely do that, and hopefully they'll provide you with some kind of update.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Actually, I did, but I'm waiting.
Oh.
It might
Nobody
take them
answered.
a couple of weeks to respond to
Right,
that as
right.
well, and that's probably a staffing issue as well. So if
All
you don't
right.
hear something in like 2 weeks from when you sent that email, just try
Mhm.
sending it again. Just
All
be
right.
persistent.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. So the grant review system is still merit-based at NSF. Is it highly encouraged to apply for grants? What happens after October 1st? And then a follow-up question, should we still apply to grants?
Yeah, I definitely think so the merit review process is largely unchanged at this moment. We're expecting further delays on any upcoming changes as the public comments are reviewed on some of those changes. And even within this draft, the merit review at this time is largely unchanged. So it is encouraged that you apply for proposals, and anything that's published on the NSF website in the division or directorate websites, as long as the date is still active, those are active programs that you can apply to. And if you have any questions about specific solicitations that you're waiting on, it is also encouraged that you reach out to the program officers or the solicitation specific email, as Jennifer mentioned. Um, but again, there are some staffing limitations, so you can expect some delays. I don't know if you have anything
Yeah, I was just gonna
else you're
add, like, in
thinking.
addition to what you just said, Sharmini, I think part of this is a tactic to get people so scared they're not applying to things. And I think that's part of why we're saying like things are open, they're still using merit review process. And really the biggest, issue with the and actually I can put this up right now. With this OMB rule and the merit review process is more relating to what happens after they do the merit review process because they want it to go through like another layer of approval by a political appointee. And that's also a big sticking point for why a lot of people are very unhappy about this rule and unhappy enough that the Senate passed their continuing resolution with the caveat that this rule not be implemented. So I think that should tell us something too about how unpopular what they want to do is. And one of the ways that we can kind of support NSF is to still be applying to the open programs, still communicating with them, still being part of the system and not letting some of the fear that's coming from the actions of OMB, which, I mean, Russell Vaught has said on multiple occasions that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to inflict trauma on the federal workforce. So I think this is also, at least from my perspective, a way that we can continue to support science and the people who are still at NSF trying to support science as well. And it looks like, Tarina, you might have something to add as well.
Yes, I just wanted to kind of state what QEM's stance is on this whole question about whether to keep applying. And the answer is, in support of what Jennifer said, yes, keep applying. Because the thing is that there's a lot of people out there, as Jennifer referred or Dr. Riehl referred, that a lot of people are not applying because they're afraid, because they've had grants that they had already in place taken from them, and they think it's a waste of time. But this is the reality of the situation. All of these proposals, RFPs, or most of the RFPs, are on a time scale. If you don't apply for them and the window closes, and then the floodgate opens, meaning that all of this stuff is cleared up, then you've missed out. You've missed out on the opportunity because you were afraid, oh, I'm going to do all this work and then nothing's going to happen. So the QEM's perspective is to have a positive attitude about it, move forward with your applications so that once all of this is cleared up, you are still in that group to be evaluated for potential uh, awarding of the funds. But it's like if you don't ask, you can't get an answer. If you don't try, you can't win. So not trying is failing off the top. So that's kind of our attitude, is just move forward, move in the same way that you've been moving in the past, and put your submissions in.
And I was just going to add too, and this is a story that I put up on this slide here. Nature just released a story on their news site about the stalling of NIH grants. And part of the information they talk about in that article is essentially kind of like a pilot running of this passing grants through like the normal review process and then sending it to a political appointee to do whatever screening they're doing. And what's interesting is that all it's really been doing is stalling when grants are getting funded. It's very rarely actually resulted in grants not being funded because it got flagged by a political appointee. So that's something that I think is worth taking away from this, is that even if they do implement parts of this rule at some point, it doesn't seem to be having as much of an impact on actual funding of awards as it is on having an impact on how long it's taking to get the funding, which is another problem in of itself, admittedly. But I just thought that was actually kind of interesting to see from that story. And I put the title for that story there. The link is technically on this slide too, but if you want to look that story up right now, you can just Google inside the new political screening that's stalling NIH grants.
Thank you so much for those responses. And I think our audience is very appreciative of the positive and helpful mindset. We do have a question from Rishi Pandit. What should I do if the proposal is returned without review?
I'd say the first thing is see what the information you got back from that, if it gives you any information on why it was returned without review. And then after that, and I want to make sure I'm not misremembering the chapter here. Sharmini, let me know if I'm
Yeah, I think that's
the right
in
one.
chapter 4.
Right, that's what I was going to say, is chapter 4, I think, is the one that has, yeah, chapter 4 of the PAPPG outlines proposal withdrawals and then proposals not accepted or returned without review. So you can go to that section and I can actually show you that right now. Here we go. I'm going to share this real quick. So here's the PAPPG on NSF's website, and here we are, non-award decisions, part 1, chapter 4. And then you can see right here, section B is proposals not accepted or returned without review. And it has some information on reasons why it may return something without review. So you could go through those reasons and see if that aligns with the messaging they gave you or helps you figure out what you need to fix. And you can also contact the program officer or the program web email if it's a program specific email and ask them for feedback too. And usually they're willing to give you something. Once again, everything's kind of on a delay, so you may have some delay in that. So it's probably worth also kind of trying to investigate it on your own. But then also in this same chapter 4 is the resubmission process. So this will also tell you if you want to try resubmitting it in the next cycle, what you need to do.
Right. And part of the reasons can be if it's not closely aligned with a specific solicitation or there's another program that it might be further aligned with, contacting the program officer and discussing that with them. They may have an idea of other areas where it could apply better. So it is worth it to reach out to them.
That's a really good point, Sharmini.
We have about 3 minutes for an additional question. In the absence of additional questions, I would just like to personally thank everyone for attending this webinar today. Thank you for coming out. And we want to remind you that the QEM events page has a list of upcoming webinars. The Heroes webpage has contact information for all of our Heroes Fellows. And the webinar feedback form is very useful for us. So we encourage you to fill it out for information on what you'd like to see in the future. Thank you very much for coming today. We wish you a wonderful afternoon.